We are here we're here at the First Nazarene, Lynchburg First Church of the Nazarene is the official title. So I'm Christy Horsley, and I am with CASA. I'm the advocate manager for Campbell County, and then I share Lynchburg with a few other folks. And we are here with the pastor of Lynchburg First Church of the Nazarene, Mike McKenzie. And do you want to say, so how long have you been here?
So I'm the pastor of children and families here at Lynchburg Church of the Nazarene, and I've been here since September. So we are from Ohio, and things are going well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Good. Welcome to Lynchburg. Hopefully everyone's making you feel at home.
It's been great.
Good. And the reason why we're talking here at this church today with Mike McKenzie, you guys maybe who've watched some live videos before around the end of March had the opportunity to meet Boz Chijibin, who is a Liberty Law School professor, and he also is a founding member of the organization GRACE, which stands for Godly Response to Abuse in a Christian Environment. And GRACE does a variety of things. They have prosecutors that investigate institutional and church abuse and deal with those cases. They also help churches develop policy around how to deal with abuse and how to prevent it. And so one of the really cool things that Grace is working on right now is a pilot certification program for churches to actually shape policy around child abuse prevention and also how to deal with a disclosure when it occurs. And so Lynchburg First Church of the Nazarene agreed to be a guinea pig for Grace's pilot program. And you guys have been involved in that pilot program for about how long now?
Yeah, we started the pilot program in about October, and it has a few speed bumps since it is a pilot program, so we're still kind of in the middle of it, but things are going well, and we anticipate being done at the beginning of June.
Okay.
So
awesome. Yeah, and so tell us a little bit. So again, Grace is actually a local resource, with Boz being one of the local people involved in it. But how did you guys come across Grace? How did you all find out about it?
Yeah, so Boz came, we have a women's group called Lynchburg Moms, and Boz came to our church and spoke about it there. And I think through that relationship, we kind of found out what was going on, and then we heard about it, and we were kind of like, yeah, that sounds like something we might want to pursue and to go into the future. We think it's really going to be one of the things that happen to a lot of churches in the future, so we wanted to be on the forefront of those things.
Yeah.
So.
And tell us a little bit too. So what does that process look like? What does it consist of? Are there different phases?
Yeah, so the process is really, it's a lot. It's like half of it is about policy development. So policy development for your children's ministry, your even young adult ministry, all of it, And then the other half is education. So we want to educate the people of the church and the kids and teenagers even as to what abuse is. Not just sexual abuse, but physical abuse and emotional and spiritual abuse. It goes through the whole spectrum of things. So it's a lot of education and policy.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. And so when we were talking a little bit earlier, we talked about the fact that might be an element that's surprising to some people in the certification process. So it's not just an education of church leadership or those working with children and teens. Why is it necessary to educate everyone?
Yeah, so we feel, and we've talked with Boz, and I believe Boz feels the same way, that just bringing staff on, volunteer staff to work with our kids and our youth and background checking them and things that matter, it just isn't enough. The statistics say that a lot of people that are caught are first-time people, so the background checks aren't going to catch that. So we feel that educating the children, educating their parents, educating teenagers, and the people of the congregation, that when everybody's got their eyes on it, then there's more chance of things being caught prior to something happening. So.
Yeah. And I believe I've also heard Boz say in some of his presentations that especially for sexual offenders, a lot of times they will offend multiple times and have multiple victims, like dozens, before they ever get caught.
That's correct.
So again, sometimes a criminal background check will not be sufficient to guard against someone who could be a danger to children. Okay, so tell us a little bit. So you're about, 3/4 or more of the way through the process?
Yeah, so we're probably about 3/4 of the way through the process. We've got the leadership team involved, and we've got all of those things. And we're working on policy development right now, and we're working on getting the education date set up for the congregation. So we're probably half to 3/4 of the way through the program is what I would say.
Okay. And so, yeah, so pretty much what you've been working on so far is the policy development around how to screen people that come in. What other kind of policy development?
Yeah, so the policy development, Grace is very good. They gave us a template of what that policy would be, but Boz is big on we need to create a policy around our specific church and around our specific needs. So we kind of go through this template, but we insert and omit things that are for our benefit, the way that we feel that we run here as a church. So the policy goes through like what the definitions of what abuse is, so that people know what the definitions, and maybe some indicators and things of that matter. And also we deal with a lot of younger adults coming in here and serving. So we're going through like the interview process because we feel like that is going to be one of the ways that we're going to catch people that may be wanting to do it for the wrong reasons. So it's about interview process and about reporting. So we also have on there about what we would do about reporting if something would happen and all these different types of abuse. So.
And also, so during your screening process, can you give us an example of maybe a sample interview question or some things that you might incorporate into the interview to kind of be an extra filter?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to our young adults, when you're talking to them, I think you just kind of hear their heart. I think that a lot of it's not the specific questions that you ask, but really how they react to the things that are going on and things of that matter. We haven't come across that yet, in certain things, but it's really hard to say what exact question it's going to be. Like they're not going to answer something if you ask, well, why do you want to work with kids? They're not going to just come out and say, well, because I'm an abuser.
You mentioned it.
So yeah.
Yes, exactly. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right. And then also going back to something that you and I had talked about just before. When you talk about educating everyone that works with children and teenagers, educating them about what the definitions of abuse are. So that could be not just something that may happen here in the church to be on guard against, but also a child that you see every week that you may have concerns about their home life. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the training would go into some of the indicators and things that would happen if they would come in with something like that, and we would go through a process of reporting and things that matter if somebody would come in with either physical abuse or something in that realm. So we're training them to take care of the whole spectrum, to really take care of the victims in this part.
Yes. And in your training process, have you guys done any kind of partnership with your CPS? I guess this would be Lynchburg City, or would you guys be okay? Has that been any piece of it so that you kind of have those relationships established if something doesn't
Not yet, but that is part of the process. So we're not quite there yet, but the part of the process is to try to get involved with some of the people that we would deal with so to make it more comfortable, I think, for people to do reporting and stuff like that.
Sure.
So when you know your detectives and when you know the people that are taking care of it at CPS, I think it makes it a lot easier to say, hey, well, I'll make that phone call.
Right, absolutely. And I know too, just from different interactions that we've had with CPS and recent in-services that they've done for us, it's really helpful because sometimes we as a community can have misconceptions about CPS and what their role is. Sometimes I think people are really worried about reporting because they think, oh my goodness, well if I call CPS that'll make everything worse, they'll take the kids and they'll be separated, when actually that is not the desire of CPS. They want to screen, and we actually, try and stabilize kids within families and provide services and protect that family as much as possible if that can be done safely. So yeah, I think that would be great to cultivate that relationship.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a question. Some church pastors might be watching and thinking, "Ooh, is this achievable for my church?" I don't know. Are you able to say what is the cost structure?
Yeah, I don't know what the cost. We're in the pilot program, so I imagine that the cost structure might be different, and they might be kind of planning out to what they are doing. But we did have a cost that we incurred of $2,500 that we paid to them to start going through this process, and it's not all about the cost. I think that for a big church or for a small church, I think it's really about what is your intent on how you're going to treat your young people and your vulnerable people in your church. And I just don't think that you can do enough really to do that. You really have to keep it on the forefront of what you're doing and be involved in cutting edge things like this to kind of pave the way. I think if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and one thing that we were talking about a little bit before is that this certification process, again, it's not just a let's train leadership or let's train Sunday school teachers. It really is about church culture, which involves everyone, educating everyone and getting everyone on board. And also, so through the certification process, have you guys made any additional changes to I don't know, any practices. So for example, I know on Grace's website some of the things that they've suggested, for example, like youth pastors probably should not be texting one-on-one or messaging one-on-one with teens, or there should be a practice of 2D leadership where there's more than one person in the room at a time with a teen. So anything like that?
Yeah, so we already practice some of those things because we already have sexual abuse policies in place. You know, through the Nazarene Church, we do a thing called Ministry Safe. So we're kind of elaborating on that. I don't know that we've made any like specific changes as of yet, but I think that there will be some coming out. Once we finish the policy and we get all that stuff in, there will be some things that change. But we already do a lot of them, which is
Perfect.
good. I think it's good.
Yeah.
So.
And so you're saying that the Nazarene Church as a denomination, they already have kind of like policy? Is there something set up? That's awesome.
Yeah, they have like a video training on sexual abuse for people that they all, at least we send all of our leaders through that, you know, all of our volunteers, and we background check and do all those things. This is just like another piece to the puzzle, something that's more and something that we feel is going to be good for us.
And so it sounds like your church leadership was definitely open to the idea and welcoming to it. So how did the church as a whole respond when you kind of presented this idea with them and said, this is something we're going to engage in as a church?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was just how we presented it. You know, I think that sometimes when you're dealing with things like this, people are kind of like, well, what happened? You know, what happened in your church? So you're kind of combating it. But we did as best job as we could of explaining this is a precautionary thing. We want to we don't want anything to happen to our kids or to our vulnerable people. We want to make sure that we can put a stop to it as soon as we can. So this is just another layer, and I think that they responded well to that.
Good.
So.
And how has it been, because again, one of the education pieces that you've mentioned is educating children too, and teenagers about safe and appropriate boundaries, so that they, not necessarily that we're educating them on the negative about what to be on guard for, but kind of as a proactive and positive, these are appropriate things. And
Yeah, so Grace has a couple programs that they have specifically for those, and it's almost turnkey. They like give you this thing and like this is what you need to present to your kids and to your teenagers and stuff like that. So they give you that, and it's you have somebody to facilitate it, and so you know it goes through age appropriate things of abuse and what the kids need to know and go from there. I think that's what you want to do. So,
yeah. And how did families respond to that? Was there any hesitation about?
Well, right now we're in the process of scheduling those. We haven't done the children's one yet, so maybe that will be a further talk that we would have on something like that, because I'm interested to see how that goes myself. So, but I think it will go well. I think everybody's kind of on board. Everybody knows what we're doing, and I think that it's going to be a good thing.
Good.
So.
And I know too, Grace has at least one resource that we've seen at some of their seminars, the children's book, God Made All of Me. That's kind of a tool for having that conversation.
Yeah, we have some of those books, and we've been kind of distributing them for families to read and things that matter. So we feel just like Boss does that every kid should read that book, or every parent should read that book with their children. So
Right. Good. Okay. So also, maybe here's a question. Is there anything that you've wrestled with as a church? I mean, certainly I would think that the certification process maybe brings up some thorny questions. Is there anything like that that you guys are still thinking through?
Yeah, so there are some things to wrestle with as a church. So the way that we react to the abused and the way that we react to the abusers. I think that it's one of the real things that we're trying to we're teetering back and forth on how do we respond to those things. Now, obviously, we don't want people that are abusers involved with our kids and things that matter. But when it comes to them being a part of corporate worship and things that matter, we're in discussion about what do we do about this, because we want to do our best to keep the vulnerable safe, right? But we also want to do our best to let God do His work, you know, and to restore like He's promised He would. So there's some theological things in there that I think every denomination and every church kind of has to wrestle with, but I think it's a good conversation to have.
Absolutely, yeah. And do you guys, you said that you've been through some of the policy building. Do you have, and again, it probably might be difficult to say on a blanket level, some of it will be case by case, I'm sure, but we've kind of talked about the care of the abused, not just the abuser. And I know Boz has talked about, he's had so many cases and he's been in a church, you know, full of pastors, and he's asked them, okay, so how many of you have ever had like sexual abuse or abuse complaints at your church? Hands go up. And he says, okay, so of the number of you that have had abuse complaints at your church, how many of you have gone to support the abuser at court? And 75% of the room raises their hands. Okay, so how many of you have ever gone to support the abuse victim at a court hearing or wherever? And almost nobody. So have you guys thought about that? Like, what would support support of a victim look like, or what would aftercare look like?
Yeah, so we have, and it was really something that was eye-opening to us, and I think even with previous experiences that I have at other churches, how we've responded to the abuser and the abused is probably different than we should. I think that Boz has done a good job of turning our eyes to that. Like, what do we do with the abused? Because oftentimes they get kind of left behind. We're all about God giving His grace and changing, the abuser and making them new, but sometimes we forget about the abuse. Now, we offer, we have our Wellspring counseling here, we have things of that matter, and I think that we're in the process of what do we do. I think we're still talking about that, and because we really want to do the best that we can, and I think the most is just making it an environment where there's people around that love you, right, and that they feel comfortable talking, because it's all about, they're not going to talk unless they feel comfortable. So, and it's not about offering counseling or this, it's about relationships, and so we're in discussion about how we're going to handle that.
Good. Yeah, that sounds really good. And so for you, as a pastor now who has gone through most of the certification process, so if you leave and go to another church, what lessons do you feel like you would take with you? What are the takeaways for other pastors as well?
Well, I think just the education part is key. I think you're going to learn a lot. If anybody decides to do this, they're going to learn a lot about abuse. They're going to learn a lot about how to take care of abuse. And I think it just, in the whole grand scheme of things, it just makes you more comfortable having the discussions. It makes you more comfortable when it comes to reporting or doing things like that. It's just an education. Mm-hmm. It's an education. I think it would make it better for you anywhere you are. Mm-hmm. So.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say, we've kind of addressed this question throughout, but what would you say to maybe a pastor or a church leader or a church member who's watching and saying, well, good for you, First Nazarene, but guess what? Our church doesn't really have that problem. So what would you say to someone who feels like maybe this is unnecessary because it's...
Well, I think statistics, in my mind, don't lie, right? So I think that you go by how many people are abused and how many things are happening, and I think it's a big problem, and not only in our churches but everywhere,
right.
And I think,
and let's maybe call out those numbers too. So it's 1 in 4 girls,
and 1 in 6 boys, that are abused by the time that they're adults. Mm-hmm. So it's a really big problem that I don't think that we just don't want to talk about it, especially in the church. We just don't want to talk about what's going on in that realm, and we kind of try to sweep this stuff under the rug so that maybe it doesn't give the church a bad name or this or that, but really it's about protecting our kids, and these things cause problems that are lifelong, and we don't want to be any part of that,
And do you think part of it, so obviously we can see where it would be a sticky and painful situation all around if the abuse is perpetrated by someone in the church or church leadership, obviously that's terribly difficult. But also, I think even if the abuse happens outside of the church or years ago and someone is wrestling with that, I think sometimes we shy away from those issues because it brings up the pain of life and, oh my gosh, we serve a loving God, and how do we reconcile this kind of pain with a God who cares? So
yeah, it is a wrestling match.
Yeah.
I think that you have to come to terms with what is it that your plan is and what you want to do. And I think that you have to get your mind off, at least just for me, right? You have to get your mind off of restoration of the abuser, right, and on to the soul care of the abused. And so you want to do both, but you don't want to miss one. You don't want, and see, at least for me, for what I've seen, too many times we forget about the abused, and we congregate around the abuser. Right. So, and they both need it.
Right.
They both need it.
And I would think too, just from a theological and pastoral perspective, I mean, the abuser, perhaps to save their soul, they need to undergo discipline.
Yes.
I
absolutely.
mean, that could be the very best thing that happens to them. And you can't have restoration without repentance.
That's right. And there definitely has to be some kind of procedure where you deal with things like that. You don't, like I said, you don't want them serving with kids and stuff like that, because I think there's always that in your mind, and things like that going on. But what is the actual answer?
Right.
And I think that if anybody has it, then put it in the comments. That would be great. I'd like to have it. So.
And I think it's also worth noting, and I feel like I've seen this both working with victims of just child abuse, neglect, but also I think this is absolutely true for people who have experienced sexual abuse, or I think sometimes when we're talking about them in the abstract, abuse victims are really sympathetic and but guess what? A lot of times in the moment when they're right in front of us, sometimes abusers are very skillful a lot of times, verbally, spiritually. I mean, they're manipulators. This is how they're successful at abuse. And also, usually abuse victims are suffering from the fallout of abuse, so they might be trying to, years later, trying to self-medicate through substances, alcohol. They might have, mental health issues, or, they might really be struggling. So a lot of times, again, I feel like sometimes it's easier to almost dismiss the victim. Sometimes we're given to that because, well, they're kind of a mess. I mean.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes we just think, well, it's over. That's not going to happen again. And so we tend to think about the things that are the problems that are right in front of us, like the criminal cases and the things like that, all the things that are kind of overtaken our time, but I think that the good thing about the GRACE program is it just puts the victim right forefront, right, and that's where the majority of your effort needs to go. I think that there's a good part of it that needs to go to the abuser and what do we do, in response. But a lot of it is just putting the focus on the abuse to try to manage that and to try to grow normally, which is really impossible after something like that. So.
Right. And I think too, I recently took part in a Facebook thread that there was actually really good discussion and conversation. The question was, what do you want people to know about sexual assault? As a survivor of sexual assault, what do you want people to know? And I think one of the biggest things that I took away from that is there were so many people on that thread who had experienced abuse in their childhood and are still, as adults, to this day, impacted and struggling with it and like dealing with the fallout and the trauma of it. And I think that goes back to your point of it's happening. It's happening already, or it has happened, past tense. People in your congregation have experienced abuse. So I think tackling the subject as a pastor and as the church, just kind of opening that door to people and acknowledging that pain exists and maybe having some resources ready, I think can be a powerful thing.
And that's kind of the plan. I think that we're not under the impression that there's nobody here that's ever been abused.
Right, sure.
And I think that maybe going through this program will help us to educate people enough where they feel comfortable to come forward and to start dealing with those issues.
Right.
So.
Yeah. There was a conference that Boz participated in November that was put on by Ashley Easter. It was the Courage Conference, and basically it was for people who had survived abuse in a Christian environment and for church leaders to come together. And one thing that one of the speakers said, he said one of the best, most basic things you can do just from the pulpit, preach on sexual abuse or abuse at least once a year.
Yeah.
Just, again, address it. And then be prepared with those aftercare resources, because odds are if you talk about it, it is going to hit home to somebody in your congregation, and they will probably need some support after.
And I think the part of that is just being ready, just being ready, and us being very visible about going through this process, I think has opened doors, and it's just being ready with the resources when it happens, because I think a lot of people aren't prepared to deal with it.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. And then also kind of, I guess, a tangential question. Do you guys, through this process, do you have in place any resources regarding domestic violence or anything like that, or like community resources that you would try and refer people to?
Yeah, I think that it's part of the program, and I think that we're working on it, and we're getting there. So I think that we're not there yet. And I think we'll probably always be getting there. The policy and stuff like that. So we'll always visit and we'll always be amending and stuff like that. But it's definitely important to have relationships with other people so that you can properly refer people to things that are going on.
Exactly. Yeah, because the church, I mean, there's no way. We know that trauma and abuse is such an interdisciplinary problem, and it affects people across so many domains. So the church isn't called to be all things, right? You are the spiritual caretaking.
Yeah, and we work with people that are more trained to handle things. So you try to just do your best.
Yeah. And I guess kind of final question that I would have around it. So once you guys complete the certification process, what do you feel like will be the ongoing conversations, or will there be any kind of yearly maintenance that you do?
Yeah, so the after the certification process, at least from what I know of the things, we'll continue with the trainings that we have, and we will continue to visit the policy. And we have this committee that we put together called the Child Safeguarding Committee, and they will constantly be reviewing the policy, like meeting every couple months or every quarter or something like that to kind of look at the policy to make sure that things are still what we want, and continue the trainings, continue the education, and keep it visible. You know, so
Awesome.
yeah.
Okay, Allison, I don't know, have we had any questions or comments? Okay, and I was going to say, I don't know if you feel brave enough for this, but I was going to say if there maybe are any pastors or churches out there that would want to chat with you and kind of pick your brain a little bit, see if this is something they'd be interested in, could they, I guess, just reach out to the First Nazarene office, or maybe
absolutely, or even, you know, my email. You know, I can give my email. It's M McKenzie, right? That's my name, M, and then McKenzie at Lynchburg Naz.com.
Okay,
so
perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Any final concluding thoughts anything that we haven't talked about that you feel like is important to mention?
No, I just think it's good, you know, to understand that this happens, right? This happens in churches, this happens in schools, this happens in your workplace, this happens all over the place, and to wipe it under the rug is not the appropriate manner to handle it. So you got to have some kind of plan, you know, to take care of abuse and to prevent abuse in your organization. And if you don't, then get working on it.
Yeah.
So.
And I think one of my favorite things that I heard Boz say is that stewardship of our children, like proper safeguarding of our children, that is worship.
Absolutely.
That is worship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we are to take care of our young ones. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, very good. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for the time investment. All right. Thanks everybody that watched us live. Thank you.